What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kevin Svenson, and today I want to discuss the price of Bitcoin. I also want to discuss probably the biggest news that Bitcoin has seen this year, which is the launch of Bakkt's physically settled Bitcoin future contracts on September 23rd, and this is going to give Bitcoin further integration into the traditional markets. I also want to discuss the overall traditional markets and where I think they're headed in the near future. So first and foremost, let's start off with the price of Bitcoin. We did get that bounce off of the 100 EMA, and we are now ranging back up to the 21 EMA as we discussed in yesterday's video. So the next major resistance point, in my opinion, is going to be coming in at the 21 EMA around this area right here, which is back at the $10,800 level, which is that breakdown point, which also coincides with this previous resistance point off of this bounce off the $9,100 level, coming back up to the $10,800 level. So if Bitcoin does continue this bounce, very likely we are going to be ranging back up to the 21 EMA and using it as potential resistance and looking at 10,800 as the short-term upside target. Bitcoin is most likely going to be using the 21 EMA as resistance, but that doesn't mean it can't cross that area. Overall, I still think Bitcoin is in the process of creating an overall descending triangle, and I do think that very likely we are going to be coming up back up to retest resistance and then pulling back to our horizontal lows and ranging into this descending triangle, and then eventually breaking down to my downside target of about $7,500. The downside target that I have at $7,500 does line up with the golden retrace, and as we know, as we've discussed so many times in all of my previous videos, Bitcoin does routinely retest the golden retrace on all of its parabolic swings, including every single one of these parabolic moves leading up to the all-time highs of the bull market. I do think it's quite likely right now that Bitcoin will be creating a trend overall in this range and pulling back to about $7,500. But now I want to move on to probably the biggest news that Bitcoin has seen this year, and that is the physically settled Bitcoin futures contracts that Bakkt is now launching. They have announced that they are going to launch this product on September 23rd. So most people in the crypto space are now looking at this news as extremely positive news, which in one respect it is, because it is giving Bitcoin more legitimacy in the traditional markets. It is giving Bitcoin more integration into the traditional markets, and this is going to be a physically settled Bitcoin futures product. So now this does give institutions the ability to get involved in Bitcoin through the traditional markets rather than getting involved into Bitcoin through unregulated exchanges and things that they're actually not licensed to get involved with. So the CEO of Bakkt made an interesting statement here. She said, uniquely backed Bitcoin futures contracts will not rely upon unregulated spot markets for settlement prices, thus serving as a transparent price discovery mechanism for the benchmark price for Bitcoin. The importance of this differentiator is only amplified by reports of significant manipulative spot market activity and other concerns such as inconsistent anti-money laundering policies and weak compliance controls. So as good of news as this may be for Bitcoin, this quote is pretty interesting because it basically points to the fact that most likely what's going to happen now as institutions now have an on-ramp for Bitcoin and a lot more money can flow into this market, what's most likely going to take place is a lot of the unregulated spot markets are going to begin to be regulated. A lot of the manipulation that we've seen with Tether and other things are most likely going to be minimized. So the way that Bitcoin is going to be traded is going to begin to change as it's being integrated in traditional markets, and it's possible that we might not see as strong volatility in the market as we've seen before. Now, of course, this is going to take a while to actually come to fruition, but I just want to bring this point to you guys that this may change the way Bitcoin gets traded overall. If it's going to be integrated into traditional markets, we most likely won't get these insane swings that we've seen before with all this manipulation of unregulated exchanges and things like Tether pumping the market. I personally believe that Bakkt, Bitcoin settled futures contracts in the traditional markets is going to change the way that this market behaves in a drastic way over time. So I just wanted to bring this point up. It's something to think about. Let me know in the comment section if you think that Bitcoin is going to see explosive growth from its further integration in traditional markets, or if you think that Bitcoin may not see as strong volatility as things become more regulated and controlled by traditional forces. So now I want to move on to the traditional markets as a whole, looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Average. If you're looking at the screen here, I've mapped this out. You can see that the traditional markets generally play out a similar trend and have a similar result at the end of major market cycles. So looking at this chart overall, the traditional markets generally play out a very similar pattern. If you just look to the bottom left here, we can see that the market overall held above this trend, eventually saw lower lows, higher highs, a little bit of instability, and then traded through the upward sloping trend line, and after that we saw some major moves to the downside and a lower low trajectory. After we found a nice bounce off of a low, the market remained above this trend, and as we got to this area right here, as we began to create lower lows and higher highs, and we traded through the upward sloping trend, we then broke to the downside. We found a low at the bottom of the 2008 collapse, which is when Bitcoin was released. We found a nice bounce off this level, remained above this upward sloping trend line, which is the strongest bull market the U.S. stock market has ever seen. Just keep that in mind. We remained above this upward sloping trend line, began to see lower lows and higher highs and a bit of instability here. And in my opinion, if we do trade through this range, if the traditional markets trade through this upward sloping trend line, then very likely we are going to repeat the patterns that we've seen in the past and enter a lower low trajectory before finding a low and rallying off that level and continuing on a new trend. So overall, guys, that's just a quick recap of how I see the traditional markets playing out going into the future here. So just keep in mind that if we do trade through this upward sloping trend line, then very likely the traditional markets are going to go through a correction period. And I think it's very possible that we retest this consolidation range right here, which could bring us back to a $17,000 Dow Jones. I do think a $17,000 Dow Jones is quite likely within the next couple of years. Also, one thing to keep in mind is Bitcoin was released during or right after the 2008 collapse, and Bitcoin has only experienced upside in the traditional markets. So if the traditional markets do enter a correction period, this means that Bitcoin will be going through something it has never experienced before, which is a full-fledged correction period for the traditional markets. Bitcoin has never seen an environment like that, so it's kind of a wild card. We're not too sure if Bitcoin will enter an extended bear market, if people will start moving funds into Bitcoin as a safe haven, as a lot of people think may take place. So we'll have to see how this really plays out. For Bitcoin, it is uncharted territories for Bitcoin. So let's just move back to the Bitcoin chart right here. Let's just bring it back to the daily. Remove this line right here. This is what I think is most likely going to take place here for Bitcoin, which is the creation of a descending triangle and a bounce off the golden retrace, creating a larger scale upward trend, similar to what we saw in the beginning of the last bull run. So that's going to be it for me today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you're interested in signing up with CryptoWatch, which is the platform that I chart and trade with, definitely use my affiliate links below if you want to support the channel. Also, let me know in the comment section what you think about the physically settled Bitcoin futures contracts that Bakkt has now announced their launch coming on September 23rd. Let me know how you think this is going to affect the market in the short term and long term in the comment section below, and I will see you all in the next video.